Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you everybody for coming today and making time out of your busy schedules for this launch ceremony of the new Vision for Economic Transformation report. What I'd like to do is, I'm Najma Pizada. I'd like us to do a round of introductions so that we can all know each other as well. Then we'll get Javed Hassan and Ali Salman to start with the presentation. So I'm Najma Pizada. I run a magazine called Global Village Space. I'm an economist by background. So I'm part of the Economic Advisory Group as well. And I'm the moderator today. So Sameer, should we take it from you?
My name is Sameer Ahmed. I'm a part of the Economic Advisory Group also. Belong to the financial sector. I'm currently heading a private equity firm out of Lahore, Knightsbridge Capital. I also teach at LUMS as adjunct faculty, and I've been a part of this group since inception. Good to be here.
So, sorry, if I can ask you, just speak up a little bit, everybody, because I know you don't have mics in front of you.
Laman Holding Company, which is just in the business of consultancy, in a management consultancy.
My name is Asif Shah. I'm from the Pakistan Administrative Service. I retired as Federal Secretary Commerce about 10 years back. And now I'm working as a private consultant on different projects and with different organizations.
My name is Ahmed Pizada. I worked in the Ministry of Finance for 23 years as Deputy Secretary, Joint Secretary, Additional Secretary. Then I worked as a member competition appellate tribunal, having additional charge of member anti-dumping appellate tribunal. There I completed a state till attaining age of 68. Now I am managing partner, Jamal and Jamal Advocates and Consultants.
Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed and I am working as Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance.
Hello everyone, I'm Gonzalo Varela. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank and I lead the trade engagement of the World Bank with the government of Pakistan.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Shimail Daud. I'm a medical doctor by background. I'm from the services sector, from the private sector, in healthcare, human resource development, and consultancy in healthcare, and also digital healthcare as well. I've also represented the Chamber of Commerce to bring that perspective as well, and I'm glad to be here and part of this conversation today.
Hello everyone, I'm Nadia Farouk. I'm an economist. I'm working as an economic consultant with the Asian Development Bank since a couple of years, and also working as a senior research fellow with the Andrew Young School, Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, Khalil Ahmed. I'm from Lahore. I'm a freelance writer, researcher, and I'm a political economist and a political philosopher. Thank you.
Thank you, ji. My name is Ali Salman. I'm a founder of a think tank called Prime Institute and a member of this group.
Assalamu alaikum. Today I'm really here as chairman of EAG, Economic Advisory Group. The other hat I know, which the honorable ministers, I often have to deal with it, and it's probably more important role right now, which is chairman of NAFT-DTC, National Vocational Technical Training Commission. But today we're going to talk about EAG and the work it's doing.
Thank you. So this report took the EAG around 6 to 8 months to think about, research and compile. And thanks to FNF, we're bringing it here to you. Javed Hassan and Ali Salman will go through the key points of the report. It will be followed by remarks by the Honorable Federal Minister for Planning, Asad Umar Saab, and then there'll be a panel discussion and followed by Q&A. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Javed Saab if you could start.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try and keep this brief because a lot of you have already been presented the findings of this presentation. But really, very quickly say that I have to pay, the inspiration for this work was partly driven by the Honorable Minister's Ministry. Dr. Zubair first approached us to look at these issues. So it's really, part of the work was really driven by the Planning Commission driving this. So, okay. So I'd like to say very quickly that there are some very basic findings. If you can go to the first slide, please. And EAG, I think we don't need to tell. We know it's an independent economic think tank. One of the reasons why it was formed was because exactly the sort of issues that we're going to discuss today in economic transformation that are not often discussed enough in Pakistan. A lot of the discussion that goes around the economic debate is really about whether IMF will be on or not on, what's happening to the trade deficit, but not the underlying causes of it. And I think it's critically important that we look at it. If we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next, please. It's really the essentially issue in Pakistan we have is a sclerotic production, productive capacities. The entire allocation mechanism is, in our view, somewhat inefficient. The policy frameworks have effectively ensured that kind of inefficiencies is promoted. We are trying to work towards a thought process where there is a change of mindset in how these allocative resource allocation takes place, because that's the most critical part. But within that, in trying to analyze that, we looked at what is known as economic complexity. Many of you would hear about it. It's basically the sophistication of the economy, the productive capacities, the capabilities, and the way to look at it very often is just what we are exporting. So if we go to the next slide, which I won't dwell too much about. Essentially, in the last 20 years, if we see, Pakistan's export basket is almost identical. It has not changed a lot. Basically, you see a lot of green, and in 2000 and 2019, you again see a lot of green. By comparison, if you go to the next slide, Vietnam, which was pretty much commodity based, which pretty much sort of unsophisticated products. In 2000, in fact, in 2000, the exports of Vietnam were less than Pakistan. Today, it's one of the largest exporters in the world, 350 billion. And the most important thing is, in this export basket, you have a huge deal of sophistication in the product base. You have electronics products, you have high value garments, you have leather products, you have services. That is very important because they've really grown in services, and it's important to make that point because Pakistan also is it's an area where we can take advantage of. Let's go to the next slide. Essentially, this slide is something which I feel policymakers should actually pay a lot of attention. This is an index. We look at economic, this is the economic complexity. Ease of doing business is talked about a lot because I think we have improved in that. But really, ease of doing business does not necessarily look at the underlying capabilities within an economy. And it looks at the regulatory structures, and which are important part of the capabilities, but not really many of the other capabilities. So I think this is something I would like to see, or something designed in Pakistan. It doesn't have to be something which we necessarily take from Harvard Growth Lab. but we should really look at what the underlying factors which contribute to this index. Pakistan in 1995 was placed at 102. In 2018, it was at 95. By comparison, Vietnam was at 107. In 2018, it was at around 65. See, dramatic improvement in Vietnam. If we look at the export product basket, we have added up about 23 products in that period. That has added about $2 per capita, whereas Vietnam has added up about 48 products, and they have contributed something like $1,000 per capita. So that just really highlights the point. Next slide. I'll skip quite a few slides. There's quite a strong relations. There's quite a few strong correlation between complexity and the not only what the growth rate is, but what it is a very good predictor of future growth rate. Those which have a lower GDP than what the economic complexity index would predict tend to find a much higher growth rate than you see those which have actually rates growth GDP, which is as the index would indicate. Pakistan not moving up this ranking is actually a question mark for our future growth potential. So really what is lacking is there is effectively a lack of capability in the economy in terms of growth potential. I take my words back, not potential. In the way we are doing things, the potential is probably not being harnessed enough. One of the things, let's go to next slide. I'll skip this slide because it's very complicated and right now, but this is more of the same thing. It's there in the document. I strongly urge you to please have a look at the document. It really, again, reflects the complexity. The more sort of beige and pink you have, the less complexity in the economy, the kind of products. The more blue you have, the greater the complexity and sophistication of products in a country. Pakistan, unfortunately, much of it is beige and sort of semi-pink, which if you see by comparison, Thailand and Vietnam is much more blue. So let's carry on to the next slide. What's needed for transformation? And that's the real key question. Essentially, it's about allocation of resources. And that's something which is fundamentally missing in Pakistan. The ability to relocate resources from less efficient, less productive, less value-added, less complex products to more complex products. That reallocation which takes place in most countries is not happening in Pakistan. Thank you very much. Just Shandana Gulzar Sahaba has just joined. Thank you very much for joining us.
My apologies for the delay, Ji.
No, not at all. So what is needed for the transformation? There needs to be a flexibility in terms of how resource moves from one activity to another. Now, I think we have presented this to the Honorable Minister before, and quite correctly said, look, Javed, and the rest of the team in AAG, everyone knows the problems of Pakistan. I don't quite agree that everyone does know the problems of Pakistan, but assuming that if everyone does know the problems, what are the policy solutions? And he says, look, people come. So we taking back that not criticism, that advice, and I think it was useful advice, and also not only in terms of what are the policy solutions, but how are they practically possible? Because some of this reallocation of resources or enabling of resources has political consequences. We live in a political economy, and what we have to do is to make sure that we don't do it in a way where there's such a backlash that effectively, actually, that whole restructuring, transformation is actually stymied. So there are 4 critical measures that we have suggested. I'll jump the next few slides for time, but we have a lot of international experience. Again, that's covered in the document. We'll really miss those slides, but let's go to the 4 policy documents. And Ali Salman, if you can talk about this, and then we can have a conclusion. And I'm really looking forward to the honorable ministers and the panel's discussion then.
Policy reforms. Next. आगे जाएं, आगे जाएं. All right, बस यहीं पर हैं. Right. Thank you, Javed sir. I think so. We have identified the group has identified these four set of policies or policy reform areas rather, which we believe are, if adopted, can help in the transformation economy. Again, want to emphasize that we are suggesting that we need to move away from the typical focus on growth and need to talk more about transformation. And we are of the view that if these four policy directions are adopted, then we can, in the long term, we can actually start preparing ourselves for the transformation of the economy. Next slide, please. First of all is importance of the integration with the regional and global trade. We have, highlighted it also a number of times before. That Pakistan remains one of the most protective economies in the world, and although in many tariff areas the rates are coming down, but government is also imposing additional custom duties and other measures, and generally we are repulsive to interconnectivity, to trade. And unless we transform this thinking and become more integrated with the world and with the region, I think we cannot truly move towards the transformation. Now, in terms of the resource allocation, what we see is that government has too often used tariff as a tool for allocation of productive activities. Instead of that, we are proposing that we need to move towards not only a reduction in the customs duties and regulatory duties, but also replacing them with a uniform tariff across board. We should let entrepreneurs take the risk of imports and exports rather than government directing through its tariff measures or protection which sectors need to be invested and move away. Second slide, please. The second sort of big policy area is the revisiting of pricing regime, and this is particularly highlighted in the current context. We are of the view that we need to liberalize support price. We need to move away from support price regime, but we also need to introduce some measures for protection of small farmers. But ultimately, we have to do away with the restrictions which we impose and unnecessarily put a fiscal burden on the government. Let's say if you think about wheat, how much money we are spending in just meeting, the wheat procurement targets, and it's another kind of circular debt which has been built in the system. So if we liberalize the pricing regime, I think we can truly move towards transformation. And within the agriculture, we have already set up good examples. We don't want to talk about just bad examples here. The example of maize crop and rice crop is an excellent example of how open economy can actually bring more productivity, keep the producers and consumers happy without depending on the government. The next slide, please. The third policy area is investment in youth and women, with a particular focus on the skills. If you look at, for instance, our resources we have spent on the higher education sector in last 20 years, every year we might be spending 50 to 60 billion rupees on higher education. And in place of that, we have spent hardly 25 billion rupees on vocational training in 20 long years. So we have more unemployment in the educated youth than the unemployment in the uneducated youth, because we have spent the educational resources on the wrong category of education. So that is an important transformation which is needed. And the last and the fourth area is the next slide, is the industrial strategy, and that's like one big area, industrial strategy. We are of the view that government needs to play a role. We are not saying that the government needs to exit completely from industrial policy, but we are envisaging a new kind of industrial strategy, which is not selection of winners and losers, but but providing some important support throughout the sectors, and actually supporting the entrepreneurship, supporting the innovation, supporting R&D, supporting IP, patents, rather than selecting, okay, we are going to do auto sector one day and textile sector another day. So we are saying we need to move away from that kind of winning selection of winners and losers in industrial policy, and need to move to a new industrial policy. And continuation of that is the importance of simplification of tax code. Again, just like tariffs, we also use taxes and fiscal policy very heavily to reward or to provide a disincentive for particular industries. We need to move away from that. And the last point here, continuation of that, next slide, is the importance of importance of reforms in the public finances itself, importance of contract enforcement, the rules which an institution like credit bureau, which needs to be streamlined so that the allocation of the private sector credit can also be available, not just for the government, which takes the major chunk of it, but also for the private sector. Again, not just with the private sector, it's not enough to say that, because within the private sector, most of the credit goes to the large players because the incentives are aligned such. So we need to move away and provide an equal footing and make sure that even the small players are can access to the credit market. So I think these are the four sort of policy reform areas which we believe are important for economic transformation.
In conclusion, I mean, these are things we think are the most important issues. I'm sure there are many more important points also that need to be looked at, but these really will cover a large area of transformation. I know the Honorable Minister and Shandana, whom I've spoken to a lot about this, are believers in transformation. Sometimes they may disagree in exactly how to go about it, but are really believers that the current status that we have is not something that is necessarily sustainable. We had a BOP constrained growth rate of about 6% in the 1980s. That fell to about 5% in the 1990s. Currently, one is told that the ADB studied was that the BOP constrained growth is around 3.8%. And that is largely a reflection of a declining rate of increase in productivity rates. And that is very important. And why that productivity rate is falling is because we fundamentally do not allow resources to be allocated to where they'll be most productively deployed. But this is our view. A lot of the detail is in the document, but I like to think it's quite succinct and relatively easy read, even for non-economists. And one of our really sort of objectives is to bring this kind of debate among non-economists as well as among the economists, especially the political forces, both from the opposition and the ruling party. But I'll stop there.
Javed, thank you to Javed and Ali for that very precise and succinct description of the report itself. We will take questions at the very end after the panel discussion is over. If I can now hand over to the Honourable Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, Mr. Asad Omar.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Right, so first of all, I want to compliment the team which has done this work. Javed said that we need a debate, not just amongst the economists, but also amongst politicians. Frankly, it's the other way around. There is a tremendous amount of debate that goes on amongst politicians, and different visions of the economy are sold by the politicians of Pakistan. Whether good ideas or bad ideas is another matter, but there is vigorous debate there. I hardly see any debate taking place in Pakistan amongst professionals. And if it does, it doesn't go outside closed rooms. I cannot remember the last time I saw a television program where different economic ideas were being debated by people who actually know something about the economy, as opposed to people like me. So that's one of the things that you may want to consider, that this is a very good, very tangible contribution that you're making. You're placing specific ideas on the table, and you are making the initial attempt, I will use that word, the initial attempt to translate that from global learnings to what has happened in Pakistan and needs to happen in Pakistan. I think this is a start, a good start, and I think you need to continue to work in this direction. But since your aim in the end is an improved Pakistani economy and not necessarily to push what you think may be the best recipe for it, it might be worth considering to start as a parallel stream where you bring in people who have looked at Pakistan's economy and allow that debate to happen and put out that the results of that debate into the public domain, so that economic debate in the country is shaped by solid economics and not just a clash of political ideas aimed at winning as much of the vote as you can. So moving on, and I'm doing this with the in the spirit of sitting in a closed room and exchanging ideas, right? So that's why I'm not repeating what I agree with. There is a lot that I agree with. I'm just asking questions and putting questions on the table. And I'll give you two examples just to make you think harder, maybe carry out more research. And one of the questions I have is that some of the conclusions that you may be reaching, are they the results of faulty policy, or are they the results of poor governance? And I give you an example of what you said here about SEZs, right? What you've said is popular in international economic thinking. And in a way, it is common sense. If you can improve the entire country, obviously that's much better than improving islands within the country. But in the last 40 years, the greatest transformation of an economy and unparalleled in the history of mankind in terms of the number of people it's taken from poverty to middle income level is China. And SEZs have been a central part of their strategy. So why did this SEZ strategy work in China and why has it failed in Pakistan? Is it fundamentally a flawed concept, or is it poor governance in Pakistan which makes even good concepts fail? Just for your information, this is something that we are working on right now, and the Prime Minister about 2 weeks back has put the ball in my court on this one on SEZs, and we will be coming in with some recommendations that we'll be making. Similarly, let's look at this issue of should we use tariffs to promote a particular economic activity or not. Now, if you look at what is happening in the last, or what has happened in the last 3 years in the telecom sector of Pakistan, the cell phone industry, what is happening is exactly what you're prescribing should happen. It is new skill sets being acquired, moving up the knowledge chain. We are carrying out and the transformation is actually dramatic. From a country which is almost completely import-based to a country where the majority of the telephone sets are now locally assembled. The price of the sets actually coming down despite being manufactured domestically. And now world-class players like Samsung announcing that they're setting up shop in Pakistan. So what's made this possible? Why has this revolution suddenly arrived on Pakistan's shores? Two things happened. One was a change in tariff structure. And I remember that when we had made this proposal, this must have been late 2018, early 2019, when it has to be late 2018 because January 2019, the supplementary finance bill, we included the change. I know that one of the greatest critics of the move, and the reason why it was being opposed was that this would discourage investment in Pakistani manufacturing. These days, I hear that colleague of mine very proudly giving the results of what has been achieved. There was a second element to it, which played a critical role, and that was the use of technology to stop the smuggling of phones. That was use of DREBs, technology-based innovation which has allowed us to curb the imports or the smuggling of phones into the country. So, and I'm just doing this, I'm placing these thoughts in front of you because people around the table are far smarter than I am, and certainly know a lot more economics than I do. So something for you to mull about, and your answers to these, not necessarily today, but your answers to these will help me clarify my thinking as well. On the fundamental path where we want to go, I think there's obviously going to be zero debate in the country on whether we need to move up the value chain and gradually move to a higher level of sophistication in the economy. I think that nobody will disagree, right? So the argument is only going to be about how do we get there, and in that I think that the more competitive and economic landscape that you can create, the better your chances of getting there is also, at least in my opinion, indisputable. That is also something. It is indisputable, but very, very difficult to make happen. Why is that? That happens because of my favorite topic: elite capture of Pakistani, not just economy, elite capture of Pakistan's economy and politics. And that elite capture has been significantly strengthened by something which is fundamentally very good, which is the opening up of Pakistan's media industry. Pakistan's media industry representing business vested interest groups rather than journalists. The media landscape of Pakistan is not dominated by journalists. Media landscape of Pakistan is dominated by business groups. And therefore, the elite capture of Pakistan has been further strengthened by this new development that has taken place. And people in the assemblies, people in the government, people like me who should be representing the people of Pakistan, very often end up representing vested interest groups, sometimes, most times knowingly, sometimes not even realizing what they're doing. Okay, there are some innocent victims in there also. But the policy end goal is indisputable, that a more competitive economy is what we need, and any of the policy structures that we have in place which restrict competition should be gradually done away with. The part which is the most arguable, in my opinion, is the role of the state. And in that, again, there is a role of the state which is indisputable. Should the government, for example, be investing a lot of money in skill development, education? Yes, it should. I think your point is spot on that we are spending, relatively speaking, we are spending far too much on higher education. In absolute terms, we're not investing enough in it. It's also a question of bang for the buck. So I know this is a difficult topic for Mr. Javed Hassan. His parent ministry is involved there. But the quality of the HEC spend needs some serious revisit. And the quality of scholarship that we have promoted, where it has become a numbers game, how many papers that you write and how many times that you get published, and not about impact, and what impact you're able to create in society and economy, is something that needs a revisit. But okay, no argument about the fact that we are under investing in skills. And Mr. Javed Hassan knows that even when in the middle of the year he comes to me and asks for several billion rupees because they forgot to budget that, we still create space for it. So that's something that we should support. Where you get into a contentious situation is, should the government only be investing in generic capabilities and forget about specific industries? I think there is room for debate. And the amount of resources available is not limited. The attention of the decision makers is limited. So this is an arguable point whether we should get completely agnostic to which sector is needing or has more potential or needs more support. What is the trick in there? And that's the difficult part, and that's where we have completely failed. For example, let's take textile. I think there is a very, very strong case for textile being a special industry in Pakistan at this point in time, and the government of Pakistan providing some special attention to textile. The trick is, are we able to move in time from the upstream of the value chain and keep moving downwards so that we take our resources and incentives away from the upstream part of the value chain and keep moving it downstream, or that because that upstream may be the highest value addition in a particular product, wherever the highest value addition is. Are you nimble-footed enough? Do you have enough policy leeway to be able to make those transitions, as China has done extremely successfully over 4 decades? Do you have the ability to do that or not? That I think is something that if you don't have that, and if it's demonstrated you don't have that capacity, then should you be fundamentally revisiting your entire approach or not? So with those thoughts, I really appreciate the work that has been done. I think it is what you're trying to do is absolutely vital, which is start debate in society based on economic fundamentals, based on what has happened around the world, data-centric, fact-based, history-based, learning from experiences and trying to apply that knowledge to Pakistan. A highly, highly, highly commendable effort. I can't praise you enough for that. And I hope that more people will.
Thank you, sir.
I hope more people will get inspired by this. And as I said, do think about that suggestion of mine of starting a parallel stream where you become the platform which brings different ideas onto the table, and then let there be a clash of ideas. So with that, thank you very much for inviting me. I had specifically asked Javed that I want to rearrange a bit because I wanted to listen to the presentation. And we'll have a follow-up on this.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. As always, your advice and your observations are very salient, and we'll take them on board. We come from a certain standpoint, but we should not be obviously ideological about it. These are things that need to be revisited or reconsidered. And as I said, it's in the spirit of debate that we put forward these ideas. And you're absolutely right when you say there's not enough debate among economists. Sometimes I look at a particular group which is of economists actually, and it's quite sad to see that many of them are proposing what is proposed in 1950s. And this is a specifically group of economists from a leading think tank. So I'll leave it there.
Asif, thank you so much for setting out a lot of questions to put those on the table. The thing that I liked the best, maybe sort of as a journalist, was the interesting point you made about how media has also become part of the political economic interest elite capture group. And in that sense, if you are from a business group and you are running a channel, how likely are you to actually talk about elite capture of the economy? So I think you've mentioned some very interesting points, and thank you so much for joining us today as well. Great, thank you. So now we will move towards the panel discussion, and my first, if I can introduce my first participant, who is Ms. Chandana Gulzar, who is an M&A for PTI and the elected chairperson of Commonwealth Women Persons. She served as the Parliamentary Secretary for Commerce and currently serves as on the committees of Industry, Privatization and Defense Production. One of the things I found very interesting about her resume, and it's a page-long resume, I have to say, with lots of detail. I'm, as an educated woman, very proud that we have educated women like her in Parliament. But she's convener of a subcommittee on agriculture, and it specifically deals with how to help rural women farmers. She is a lawyer and has specialized in working on international trade law and with the WTO. So with those thoughts, Chandana, if I can get you to start.
Thank you so much. That was a very generous introduction. 2 questions. One, how much time do I have?
8 to 10 minutes.
I'll try to finish in 8, so I promise. Secondly, is the medium of language English?
Whatever you're most comfortable with.
I'm comfortable in all. English is easier in some
sense.
Okay,
let's do English because we're talking about economy and economics, and I think it's easier.
And when you ask a Pathan to speak in Urdu, you better be prepared for masculine and feminine surprises. Thank you, everyone, and my apologies for the delay, but I must say this is a lot of us are being made fun of in the media nowadays, PTI, MNAs, that we're doing self-sabotage. And I think my delay was a very good description of that self-sabotage. If you're going to sit at the head of the table, please be on time. But I blame the roots from the Supreme Court, not myself. Typical PTI as well. Since, unfortunately, I am political, like it or not, I will have certain statements to make which will not be politically correct, but please forgive me. I'm not here to convince anyone. It's just my point of view on how I see things. I also want to thank Javed Hassan Saab, a good friend, a colleague, and another good friend who is sitting across the table, Gonzalo. I don't even, half the things I say are in Pashto. I don't know how to say them in English. But Gonzalo's presentations, whenever I see them sneaking their way into National Assembly presentations and others, make me happy that the fight and the war is not over yet. Nobody has given up. Part of the presentation you made, Javed, was very heartening, because this is something, while I was Parliamentary Secretary Commerce, I fought long and hard for this, but I was in a minority of one, unfortunately. So the most I could do was resign, which is what any good woman would do when she's overpowered by another 100 men, instead of fighting with them. But here we are. Now, I'd like to start with a little bit of history. When I joined Commerce Ministry, I was in Geneva for 7 years representing Commerce Ministry in Pakistan at the WTO, where we had a fairly good, strong fight for Pakistan, and those were the days when our exports were increasing. By profession, I'm a trade lawyer, not a politician, stuck in the wrong job for the moment. As soon as we arrived in Pakistan, two things happened. One, Pakistan got the GSP Plus. And secondly, in April of 2014, Disney and JCPenney left Pakistan. They took their textile orders away because big companies in mostly Punjab, Faisalabad and Karachi would not adhere to the basic standards that European consumers wanted, which is separate bathrooms for men and women, rest hours, simple things. And we lost those orders. And we all know what happened. Our exports came down from 25 billion to nearly 21.5 billion in a year and a half. It wasn't a surprise. Now, this is not political blaming. This is exactly what Javed Saab has said. And perhaps the mother of all political sins is how we have mollycoddled the sugar industry. In my time at Commerce Ministry and thereafter, we had 4 different kinds of protections given to the sugar industry. We give them a distribution subsidy. We give them a production subsidy. We give them an RD, a special regulatory duty imposed on imports of cheap sugar. And on top of that, we give them an MSP, minimum support price for sugar farmers, out of which the money never makes it to the farmers. And like it or not, the people, rightly as Javed Saab said, as you know, the one we call the Artis, the middleman, is sitting in your National Assembly, he is sitting in your Senate. And I say he, not she, just for this particular subject of sugar. Now, the question is, do we care about the farmer, the poorest one at the end of the spectrum, my voter, 70% a rural area? And frankly, no one cares. I'll give you an example. If you look at your, this is last year's figures, you'll forgive me. Our GDP last year was 42 trillion rupees, of course, out of which 22 trillion came from services and 9.4 trillion from agriculture. And guess what industry contributed? Our main subject of discussion. Industry gives you 2 trillion less than agriculture, 7.3 trillion. And how much subsidy goes to industry and how much subsidy goes to agriculture? If you look at the federal subsidies, 99.9% are going to prop up industry, while industry is a provincial subject after the 18th Amendment. So if you talk about distortion of allocation of resources, let's start there. On top of that, in agriculture, not only have we creamed the farmer, the smallholder farmer in particular, livestock, in 2014 August, a decision was made around Eid al-Adha, very clever decision I must say, that all the abattoirs would shift to one city in one province in Pakistan. We banned the import and export of livestock, which was principally responsible for taking KP and Balochistan out of terrorism and into the mainstream. The only thing they could do was livestock trade, and we banned it. We don't give them urea for fertilizer because it can be made into bombs. we flatten that area in terms of livelihoods. And then we wonder why the country cannot grapple with employment issues. Because we took one political decision to please one particular federal minister, and we shifted all production of meat and meat exports to that province and that city. This is how we make decisions. We're fighting this now on 3 different fronts in the National Assembly with Commerce Ministry and MNFSR, Commerce Committee, Pak Afghan Committee, and MNFSR Committee. Let's see if we succeed with 3 different MNAs against the bureaucracy. But that's a pity. Why does it have to come down to the bureaucrats being used by business interests? And that's the white elephant I want to talk about. And that's what Asad Saab said. It is never a mistake when we misallocate resources, when we don't match productivity to their best use the money. These are all political decisions. And when I say political, I don't mean just politicians. Asad Umar Saab talked about elite capture. Gonzalo, you guys came up with a report which talks about 6 different elite groups in Pakistan. And if I could sort of rake trouble for myself, those groups are political, Pakistan Business Council, the bureaucracy, the military, the mullah, and the media. So what Asad Umar Saab said has already been said by World Bank in much better terms, in that everyone is connected. 6 brothers, 5 brothers, they've got a pot, their hand in every pie in Pakistan. So they don't miss the spectrum. Now, the question is what to do about it. I'll give you an example on the positive side. So far, what I've said has been pretty dismal and depressing. I'll come to the positive side. Last year, March 2020, before the lockdown, Speaker National Assembly had a huge event on smallholder farmers. As a result of that, and directives by the Prime Minister, we, National Assembly, have been working on chalking out an agriculture reform plan for smallholder farmers. It has been painstakingly difficult. We get resistance at every turn and corner. Nobody wants to talk about a smallholder farmer, even though he has 50% of Pakistan's land. And in terms of number, it's 78% of Pakistan's farmers. Because there was a reference in your presentation to insurance for smallholder farmers, we are now working, this committee, we're going to lay down this report in the House on the 30th of December this year. Alhamdulillah, it's one of the few committees in the National Assembly where we don't play political games. Aisha Ghaus Pasha from Noon League, Ehsan Tewana from PTI, and Naveed Kamar from People's Party. They're co-authors of this report. It's going to be an uncontroversial report in the Assembly only insofar as the politicians behind it are concerned. It's going to be an incredibly controversial report because we talk about finances, we talk about soil, water, and subsidy. We'll see how we implement it. The provinces are going to do it, and that is going to be the real test. Interestingly though, and this is perhaps going to be my final note, in Pakistan, and this is the controversial topic I want to leave you with, even if you have the best laws, the best finances, the best allocation of resources, you are not going to be able to make heads or tails of it, because in Pakistan, where the courts are concerned, they are your biggest enemy in ease of doing business. You set up a business, bypass all the laws, you make sure everything is smooth, the court will give you a 3-year stay order. When legally it can't give it to you for more than a month, they will give you a stay order for 3 years. Let's see where that investment goes, and let's see where things happen. So unfortunately, like it or not, I usually hate politicians, and God has a sense of humor, I guess, where he brings me. But it's not politicians alone. Till you sort out your courts, you're not going to be able to do anything. So I end on that note. Thank you.
Chandana, thank you for that very comprehensive overview that you've given us. Now I'll turn to Dr. Ali Hasnain. He is the head of economics at Lums University. He's a senior research fellow at the Mehboob Haq Center and a CDPR fellow. His research interests focus primarily on how public service delivery can be improved through reform initiatives, which is exactly what we're talking about here, how to reform and bring about the results we need. Dr. Ali, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for joining a bit late, but I had the chance to go over the report earlier in the day. And I'll start by congratulating the team, Javed Saab and everyone else who's contributed, for putting together in one place a lot of the key ideas that many of us who think about the economy every day do consider. Although I will say as a preamble that I think it's a tough measure to hold economists to say that ideas from the 1950s are still used. Ideas that are never implemented don't age. And many of the ideas, good ideas from the 50s and 60s and through the decades have not been implemented, unfortunately, in this country. So if you look, and not just in economics, but in many other sectors, you'll see reports from the 80s, which is as far back as I've read reports, that are maybe 80% still quite good and 20% implemented. So nothing here strikes you as being entirely radical in terms of the ideas. I think the core focus of the study, which is its biggest strength perhaps, is that we're articulating that economics and a good economy is not about production but productivity. And productivity has to be measured and tested in an economy, and an easy way to do that is to look at how contestable markets are. If you have a firm that's selling, let's randomly pick cars, and you've divvied up the market so that that one player has the small end of the market, another the middle class, and another the third the higher end of the market, totally fictional, then you have models that are not competing against one another, and so there's no economic interest in improving the quality of the car that you're producing. You don't have contestability, of course, so contestability can come through international trade, but it can also come through simply giving a level playing field to all players. And this is something that we have failed to focus on. We belittle the middleman in this country. Middleman it's a bad word to call someone a middleman. But we've also restricted the market such that middlemen can't enter, new players can't enter into the space for being, at least in the agriculture sector, a middle person. So you're not providing a level playing field. Where I also think, I do believe that there is space for industrial policy, but I think that it's important to go over some of the concerns that the report raises. And I would respectfully disagree with the minister who spoke earlier, saying that we have to pick sectoral focuses. Simply because while it might intellectually be a good idea for us to think of an industrial policy, over the decades, if we haven't learned that we can't trust the state, and there I hold everyone involved in the state accountable. If we can't trust if we haven't reached the conclusion that the state cannot be trusted with industrial policy to do it on merit and not to pick winners, I don't know what we're looking at. The threat of withdrawal of benefits is not credible, and it is entirely sort of, it's still puzzling to me exactly how it was that the new auto policy was finally created. One theory I've heard is that the Chinese role in the economy rose to be more important than the Japanese donations that used to be given. And so that interest group, sort of, which had rival interests to enter the market, came in. But the threat of withdrawal of benefits is not credible. So we've had infant industries, and we with a straight face say that auto is still an infant industry. I was just talking actually to multiple people in this room earlier in the day, and I was saying we don't produce toys and coffee makers, but we have the audacity to believe that we have a market that will support auto, and we continue to provide those benefits. And that is simply naked rent seeking. You can argue till the cows come home that there are different intentions at play. I can't read people's intentions, but I can read the situation, and the situation it's pure rent seeking, which ends up with economists being very frustrated, because at the end of the day, perhaps the audience is looking for technical solutions to political problems, and our problems, all roads lead to politics. Before I come to that, actually, a few things that I think the report could have added, and I hope to see revised into future versions, is the importance of institutions that support markets. To me, the most important institutions supporting markets are the security of life, so law and order, and we don't need to be told about law and order this week. Property rights, so in Pakistan, your patwari is another curse, is a gali. So fixing property rights, and the third is contract enforcement. Those are theoretical underpinnings of a well-functioning market. So the conclusion that markets are welfare enhancing cannot be reached without having property rights, contract enforcement, and security of life in order, which is necessary for the voluntary exchange. So if for the economists in the room, the Edgeworth box is premised on security of life. There's also something to be said for those areas where market players absolutely cannot solve the scenario, and that is the range of public goods that we have to have, and there to have a well-functioning bureaucracy that is able to implement efficient public good provision is obviously common sense. But I'll end by saying that all roads lead to politics, as I said. We have a ruling class. If you think about who the winners and losers in today's Pakistan are, we are probably all winners in some sense. The status quo serves us. And this is true for the military, this is true for politicians, and this is true for the commercial elites of the country. Ultimately, until those that are not served, those that are not provided a level playing field, until they organize in grassroots politics and they press for that change, they press for the type of institutional reform that can bring us into economic, let's say, contestation with other countries in the region, especially. I think there's no hope. So one hope, and perhaps using the privilege of speaking to politicians in the room also, is that politicians have to do far better in understanding economics. There is absolutely no rigor of economic thought in political parties, and I speak across the board, across the aisle. So PTI, when it was in the opposition, besides standing on containers and talking about corruption, could have spoken of Daronomics, which every economist in the country was writing about how adverse the impacts of this were going to be. And they could have shifted the blame for the coming crisis of the dollar onto the party that had created that crisis in the first place, which it didn't. So that was an own goal. It was an obvious opportunity to deflect future blame that it didn't take. And I've had the fortune or misfortune of advising other parties also on opposition speeches at budget, when it's time to write a budget. And there's absolutely no internal capacity to engage with modern economic ideas. So you do well to set up internal think tanks. Well, stop there. Thank you very much.
Ali, Shandana, thank you for those presentations. Two interesting themes that run through both your presentations was one was the role of the courts, which Shandana mentioned is the fact that it's useless, and which Ali talked about the contract enforcement and the importance of property rights. So, the role of courts is very important. The second thing, which I thought you both basically mentioned, was the rent seeking, whether it was abattoirs, meat abattoirs, or auto policy. And both of these things actually goes back to what Asad Omar was talking about, which was, is it the fault of faulty policy or is it actually bad governance? So, these are interesting ideas. I'd like to open the session now for questions and answers. We do have a mic going around. Okay.
Can I say one or 2 points in response to
Sure.
what has been said? I am part of PTI, and that's one of the roles. But so I support a lot of what the government says. But the point about bad governance, and that's very often the theme that PTI talks about, is important, but also bad economics should be equally important. And very often we have not focused enough on what bad economic policies have been and how disastrous that those economic policies. One of the best ways, if you want to use that word, corruption, that is enabled in society is by having the involvement of government in just about every part of our life. The government is the biggest enabler of corruption. If you take out the government and have markets functioning, as Ali has done quite correctly, but correctly functioning, there are market failures. And that's a very good point you make, and we should probably emphasize on that. if you have good market functioning, corruption by and large actually dissipates on its own. And one of the best ways to dissipate or eliminate corruption is not simply by using the strong, well, the strong arm of the law. I was going to say strong arm of the NAB, but really by enabling market forces, as Hayek would say, the autonomous forces that work within the market to come and eliminate the inefficiencies. That is not being allowed, and effectively the prevalence of government is enabling rent seeking and in many cases downright corruption. I'll stop there.
So we'll start taking questions. If you could just introduce yourself once again, sorry. Where's the mic? Mic?
I think it is on. Well, I'm Nadia Farooq, working as an economic consultant with Asian Development Bank and with Andrew Young School, Georgia, Atlanta. I really appreciate the work has been done with the inclusion of economic complexity. While my suggestion would be to focus on savings, our savings to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the region. That's the reason whenever GDP growth goes up, we drop down to the ground as having no savings to support the rising growth, and ultimately we borrow a lot from the local and international sources. Without increasing the exports, which is mentioned in the report, and savings, we cannot mitigate the historic boom and bust cycle. So I want to put equal weight on both of the macroeconomic indicators. I also want to say something about SEZs, as Minister Saab has mentioned. According to an Asian Development Bank's report, the success ratio of SEZs is only 22% in the world. China has 5 successful examples of SEZs, and those are all on the ports. As the cost becomes too low by using ships, China has first and only dry port SEZ, which is in Xinjiang, and they want to connect that SEZ with Pakistan. So, however, the suggested SEZ in Pakistan are all in the far-flung areas. So, how can we compete the criteria given for the successful SEZs? Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question over here, if you can bring the mic over here. And I'd also like to encourage other EAG members, if they feel like they'd like to add in something or maybe answer a question, please feel free. Dr. Shazia is here, Muin's here, Sameer is here. So I'd like to encourage you guys.
So Idris Khwaja from PIDE here. So I would congratulate the EAG for producing this document, and many of the measures suggested here would probably bottom to one thing, that is improve governance. For example, if it is being suggested that we should have tariff restructuring, tariff rationalization, or pricing rationalization, these would have fiscal implications. So unless and until the government reduces its size of the government reduces, the government would not be able to go for fiscal reforms. So the first thing is to restructure the government itself. And the examples of this could be that we live in an era where the powers that are traditionally should be with the government, like sanitation, etc., are going to the provinces, are being taken away from the local bodies to the provinces. This is happening in etc., where city like Karachi is being controlled by 7 authorities. And if there is a rain in DHA, the civic authorities cannot do anything about it. So the first thing that we need to do is to improve governance. The second is to improve markets, to let the markets function. And one of the crucial elements for the markets to function would be information. If we want to buy exchange rupees for dollars today, we won't fear that if we go to the blue area, we would be taken for a ride, because we can look at the exchange rate parity on the internet, and if it is 177 or 176, so the money changer cannot take us for a ride. But this is not the case for the real estate. In real estate, we do not have information. So there is a market failure in the context of information. Then there is when things like Nasla towel and other things are happening, then there is issue of, as Dr. Ali Hasnan mentioned, of property rights and contract enforcement. So the bottom line is improve governance, including, as the chair said, improve the role of the judiciary. The second thing would be the most important thing in the current era is that, as Javed Sahab said, that today we are talking about measures of the 50s and 60s. So probably today we should be talking about measures of the future as well. So the first thing, the crucial thing would be internet for all. Number of things depend upon the availability of internet. Whether it is education, whether it is commerce or other thing, and the internet penetration is very, very low in Pakistan. And last but not the least, we should be able to look at the future of work. What would be happening to some of the jobs in future? Some of the jobs would simply go away in future, accounting and legal counseling, etc., etc. Even there is going to be a revolution in medicine as well. So the technology, the focus on technology would become of utmost importance in this scenario. So probably if you focus on these things.
Thank you, Dr. Aziz. You've mentioned several failures that government needs to work on. Any other further questions?
I just want to, I have 2-3 points. One point that Javed Sahab mentioned.
Sorry,
that
can you just introduce yourself?
My name is Hamza Habib. I'm a journalist. I'm working for a Bold News. The one thing Javed Sahab mentioned, that the role of the government should be minimized. But at the same time, we see that if we want to minimize the role of government, we have to build the capacity of the regulators. Because if the regulators are not strong, it will be economic chaos. And right now, if even the most competent regulator is State Bank, even it has the capacity issues, severe capacity issues. So how can we minimize the role of government? The other thing I just want to, that I think 2-3 years back, there was a seminar in which Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, former governor of State Bank, mentioned that it's not the case of planning or the capacity of government, but something strange things happen with the economy which we cannot compete. She said that war on terror totally destroyed the economy. 3-4 years where there was economic chaos. So all the plans and all the whatever planning commission did and the reports prepared and whatever the plan of action was prepared, it become goes to the dustbin or it was shelved. So foreign policy again is a big issue. No one knows what kind of situation in Pakistan will be in the years, 5 years, 10 years to come. The last thing I just want to mention, that as far as courts are concerned, when the extremist groups, the lawyers who protect the extremist groups or something like that, they become the judges of the courts. How can you deal with it? And lastly, after 2007-8, we see there's a tussle going on between after the end of Musharraf regime. There's a tussle going on between the state institution, which is still going on. And it's totally, and no one knows where it will end. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Everybody seems to be harping on, I think this conference should have actually been about legal reforms. Javed, do you want to briefly answer that question?
One question about...
Can I ask a question?
Please do. Okay. If you can be brief, please.
Yeah, it'll be brief. My name's Khushbakt, and I recently graduated from LUMS as an economics major, and I'm currently working at Easy Pesa. Giving a perspective of the youth, we talk about economic transformation, and we've mainly listed things like trade barriers and policy making. There are two things that I believe can transform our economy, in the sense that, number one, we make more data-driven policies. We ensure that data is inculcated in every policy making. We see that prototype being implemented in the ISAS program, where we did see that how data-driven policies were successful during the COVID times. Second, how do we include and sort of provide a conducive environment to entrepreneurship and scale it up? Because In 2021, we've seen startups like Airlift, we've seen startups like Dastagir that have grown to be huge giants and have reach seed fundings to new levels, and they definitely improve the macro economy of our country. So on governance levels, how do we see that entrepreneurship will become more conducive, in sense of accelerators, incubators, proper guiding platforms, etc., that I believe must be added in the new vision for economic transformation?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And since Javed Saab's other role, less important role, of course, is Chairman NEVTAC, he can tell us about what he does for the youth.
I think the role of the government EAG has a distinction of having very diverse set of thinkers. The views are very diverse. I might be in some ways considered an extremist in promoting free markets and the absolute determination of free markets. But even I am not a libertarian. I do believe there's a incredibly important role of the government, but the government has to be, as in most of the successful economies, an intelligent government. There has to be intervention of the government. I think Ali Hassan has said, there are market failures. The markets are not operating in Pakistan. And one of the reasons why the markets are not operating is the government's intervention not to allow them to operate. So yes, we need government there. We need better regulation. We need, for things like incubators and the things you're talking about, we need regulations. We need an SSCP which is forward thinking. We need a competition commission that intervenes to prevent the kind of monopolistic practices that we often see. So it's not about having no government, certainly not, but the kind of intervention the government does has to be restricted, limited, and certainly it should not be one which is aimed at providing rents. I mean, just one final point, which Asad Umar Sahab is not here, but he's made about telecoms and mobiles. It is great that we are producing, but there has to be a time limit on this. How long will we provide these tariff concessions? Like, there is some basic laws like Mills bustable, which is used all over the world where there is tariff protection provided. There's no mention of that in our policies. If there is going to be some tariff protection, might as well at least use what is commonly used in other countries in using infant industries. There's no discussion. We were one of the first to talk about that. And I would want more economists to talk about some very basic rules in tariff protection, which happens if you're talking. So there I'll stop.
Javed Saab, thank you. Dr. Zubair actually joined us late, so he can tell us what market failure made him come late. And he's just going to make a few brief comments. He's promised me.
He's the chief economist. If you can introduce yourself, sir.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mohammed Zubair. I'm Chief Economist, Planning Commission. My apologies for turning up late. Believe it or not, I spent 3 hours in a very intense meeting dealing with economic transformation. Literally. And the infant industry arguments played out in its full glory. And although we were talking about economic transformation, but our counterparts were really focused on creating a government structure which is basically very bureaucratic and an employment agency for high-end scientists. And I think Sahin is here, my colleague Zafar is here. We fought your case. Economic transformation based on the economic complexity framework has been very dear and near to my heart. My experience in my previous job, we were trained to look into some of these issues. And since my return to Pakistan last year, when I started work in the Pakistan Planning Commission, I was tasked to develop a growth strategy. So I put together some series of documents
And there was one occasion when I had a very long 2-hour meeting with the Minister Asad Umar. And at the end, he said, why you are talking about economic transformation? Why don't you say growth strategy? Something which everybody understands. And in this journey, Javed Hassan and Ali Salman, I think they were the ones who were my partners. But they soon got exhausted and left the ship.
We have not left the ship.
You have left the ship. And I was left holding economic transformation agenda on my own with practically no support after a point.
Okay, discussion over.
So I thought I better be candid here, and I was looking for this opportunity. So
Can I just quickly
no,
say
no,
that?
you cannot.
No, no. Can
let
I?
me
No,
finish my-
in praise of that, this whole document was started off because of the prodding of Dr. Zubair. So thank you for getting us to do this.
Thank you, thank you. But I think life moves on, the agenda goes on, and we are making some headways. This economic transformation agenda is getting traction, rootedness in the government, and we are in the process of partnering with the Ministry of Science and Technology and the allied research establishments, as well as with Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of Industries next week. We would not only need your prayers, but we would need committed contributors to support in some of the analysis that is needed to go through a thoughtful process of policy making. You see, I never realized government policies is not what we write here or talk about. It's always in the form of a summary. So if you cannot put your policies in the form of a summary, you can talk endlessly. At the end of the day, if the summary doesn't say the minister has seen and approved, it doesn't matter. So basically, I think we are all, mashallah, committed to this agenda, but we need to help us. We are seeking your support to help us in preparing the summaries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Zubair. I actually didn't do his introduction properly because he came late. But he is the chief economist for the Planning Commission. He has been the principal economist at the Islamic Development Bank as well, held various senior positions internationally and domestically. And most importantly, he was at my alma mater, LSE, London School of Economics. So thank you so much, Dr. Zubair, for joining us. I'm glad you were able to make it. Any other further questions? Okay, great. We have Muin over there and then Fahim. Perfect.
Gentlemen at the back, whose face I
So
can't see.
let's go to Muin first.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Dr. Nasser. I really want to hear from you.
Okay, I'll be quick. So this is Moeen Bartley. I'm a part of the Economic Advisory Group. So we've looked a lot on Vietnam. So how about going deeper? So a certain transformation happened in Vietnam. So what were the forces that made that happen? If you're really looking at Vietnam is one of the big success stories. So there are power dynamics in every country. And whenever a change happens, something makes that change happen. So what was it in Vietnam that made that change happen? And how can we learn from that and make that change happen here? Because we know we're looking at what should happen, but now the challenge is how to make it happen. And it's good that we're discussing it, but discussing it or having it discussed, having it part of government documentation, that's not going to be enough. We have to forces have to be unleashed, or forces have to build up that make this change happen, because there are on the other side there are very powerful interests to stop it. So they will stop. If it's just a discussion, this will be stopped. So it has to be dynamics. So what are those?
Right, quickly, there was dynamics involved, and the examples we gave about Mexico and Vietnam are very pertinent, because what happened when Mexico joined NAFTA? Once it joined NAFTA, it was forced to change. Similarly, the dynamics that happened in Vietnam are not because of the Communist Party or dramatic. It was simply a question that it became part of ASEAN. Once it became part of ASEAN, it had to change its tariff structures. I have a fellow colleague, and we used to have lots of arguments and discussions. So I please, if Najma, if you can allow him to, and he's in FBR, one of our best institutions in the country right now, as the head of research there.
Thank you very much, sir. Basically, I would introduce myself as a student of development studies for the last 15 years. And the thing which prompted me to ask a question is that one word was repeatedly used, and that was capabilities. And the way I understand capabilities is the way it has been defined by Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate. And he sees the underlying factor behind increasing capabilities is the increase of freedoms. But the way we have targeted increasing capabilities of our industrial sector is we have focused on providing them more and more support. Support does not increase capability freedoms. Support increase dependencies. So this is how it is today. My question is that shouldn't the focus of our policies be on breaking this cycle, this mindset of our industries, which are more and more into demanding more incentives and more support from the government? The policies, as Dr. Saab has pointed out, we need more contested or more competitive markets. But is these contested in those competitive markets, is the industry also demanding it? Because whenever we think about increasing our industrial capacity, we talk about special economic zones, tax breaks, and increased incentives. So my suggestion on this would be that we should focus on weaning our industry out from this incentive-based dependency and give it more freedom to prosper and then to contest with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Dr. Nasir. Fahim Saab, if you can introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. My name is Fahim. I'm with the National Security Division of Pakistan. I'm looking at non-traditional security. I'll keep this very brief. There are 3 points which sort of keep coming up to me. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. We've actually, coming to what Moin Saab said about Vietnam, and I'm sure it was discussed earlier, Vietnam grew just like certain other countries grew based on broad-based planning, which was an integrated process, Doi Moi and all that, whatever. I'm not going to educate anybody here on planning, but the second thing is integration, reconfiguration of your economy, which I believe this document talks about. But I want to focus on one thing which it pains me to say this, but I don't see it being discussed. It was briefly mentioned by the gentleman sitting in front of me. It is violence. The science of violence and the methodology of violence. I happen to be the one who was screaming at the top of his lungs at the highest forums that we need to start controlling and understanding violence. I myself have experienced a C4 explosion. There are many people here who don't know the difference between C4, RDX, and TNT. Guess which ones blew up most in Pakistan? We don't make C4, we don't make RDX, we don't have the chemicals. Why am I bringing this up? I've sensitized certain government platforms, I can't talk about it right now, about where our GDP would be right now had we not had 5,000 bombs go off, had around about 60 to 80,000 people not been killed. Our GDP right now would stand at, and I know I'm saying this with a sane mind and due analysis, $450 billion on average. So when somebody commits violence, we need to understand what's happening. One thing which I would request Prime and all distinguished platforms is to just add a small portion on the violence in the country. Pakistan was one country in our analysis that was the only country that faced violence, to the extent that we had to open up certain search platforms and people were questioning me, what's your problem with violence? I said, well, my problem with violence is it works. It works beautifully if you know how to do it. So when people searched, for example, Dhaka bomb blast, do you know what came up? Uh, it was called a false something, a false alert. False alert. We put in Shanghai bomb blast, nothing. Shootout, Saigon, nothing. The moment you put in a Pakistani city and take your pick from the menu, you are going to have a lot of live searches of what's going on. So when I would humbly request anyone who's studying economics, if you can just add a small portion about how do you see violence happening in your country. There is a reason, and I'm not going to expand on this at all, there's a reason that Modi had to back down from the Sikhs on the agri thing, and it's had something to do with India's jugular. So I'm not here to educate anybody, I'm just sharing with you that for the first time in Pakistan's history, violence is being mapped from an economics perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fahim. I think you rightly pointed out that when we
Sorry,
talk about war on terror...
I'm not a doctor.
Oh, sorry, Fahim. Thank you so much. You rightly point out the war on terror. When we mention the costs and the lives lost, we grossly underestimate both of those. Any further questions?
I would just like to add this to Fahim's response. I mean, it goes back to basic Adam Smith. I know this is Ali Hasnan's favorite quote. You know, it says, in a well-governed society, and well-governed means there is no violence, that universal opulence extends itself to the lowest rank of people. And that happens almost automatically. So yes, I think one of the first things which is mentioned, we need to have a society where violence is controlled and is not something, without that, much of our talk is a bit theoretical. But really, we have assumed that violence will be controlled. You're doing such an excellent job at NSA.
Thank you, Javed. This is the first senior economist IMF. My comment is very much in academic capacity. First of all, I mean, on the economics of this document, it's brilliant, amazing, very holistic. This really looks like a vision. So, but I won't comment on economics of this document, but I'm more concerned or more curious about the strategy to get it through and at which level. So this document basically has something to do with different ministries. For example, it has something to do with the commerce because it has a international trade aspect into it. It has something to do with the FBR because it has a taxation element embedded into it. It has something to do with the planning because it has a growth, medium-term, long-term perspective embedded into it. It has to do something with the Ministry of Finance because it has a budgeting aspect embedded into it. So all the institutions in this country, they're sort of strong force in themselves. So what would be needed is a centralized point where this entire theme or the entire idea could be integrated into the policies of all these institutions. So what is the idea there? Because at the end of the day, it's about implementation of the entire theme and translation of the overall vision into the policies, into the institutional frameworks of the institutions. So it's like it's too broad, but what is your mind there? How are you going to to integrate it with so many fronts? So that's just a...
I think, Javed, you want to briefly answer?
That's
okay, otherwise I have a final question and then we can, you can answer it? Okay. I have my own final question. I think I should be allowed to have a question.
All right. And just, I think it's very important, which Dr. Zafar mentioned. We have internally, we are deliberating on this strategy. What is the next? And I like to submit, and I'm going to use the words which Ali Hasnan used. all roads lead to politics. And I think the decision making, of course, being done at the political level. And unless we can engage at a cross-partisan level, this vision, which you have appreciated, and we are grateful for that, would not fly. So I think first part of strategy is that we have to work across political spectrum in a cross-partisan manner. But I would say, of course, when we talk about resource allocation, it is not a apolitical document. It is very much a political economy document. So there is very that's clarity. In fact, on record, we extended invitations to senior leaders from all political parties, even for this event, and we will continue to do that in the future. A second sort of leg of that strategy is the educational institutions, especially the economics faculty, business faculties. They are all contributing in the debate. They need to be engaged. I'm glad that Dr. Ali Hasnan is here, but more, I think we have other university institutions present here. So we need to increase that engagement as well. So we are not debating enough of economics in this country. And we will play our role, but I hope that others will also play their role.
Ali, thank you. So my last question would really be to Shandana, who has actually been on the other side working on transformation and now is in government as well. So Shandana, how do we bring transformation into government policies?
Thank you. I don't find myself agreeing a lot with Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, except when he says that democracy is the best revenge. I don't think democracy is the best revenge. I think it's the only way. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the last 20 years, my own included, whenever you're going to have unrepresentative leaders making decisions, in particular economic ones, there are going to be consequences to pay. My friend here, Shabazz Saab from ZTBL, is sitting here, and he can give you, I think he's one of the shining examples of how he's struggling against both time and tide to reverse decades of rot at the ZTBL. They were all political decisions, regardless of who made them. The only way you're going to have real transformation is if we come out of our own little shells. And frankly, it's a chicken and egg situation. Usually only those politicians last in Pakistan who will promise beyond what they can deliver. The honest ones will usually be shown the door, but there is a bit of a spark, a bit of hope. I know it's going to sound very self-serving when I praise my own prime minister. But my brother had a small stint in one political party, I will not take the name, where all we did was say, Assalamu alaikum, kaise hain, theek hai, halat khairiyat se hain, and after 4 hours we'd go home. And I recall, I don't know if Asad Umar Saab is listening, but Asad Umar Saab was not in this meeting. We had a parliamentary party meeting in which 3 independent MNAs and a host of PTI MNAs actually complained to the Prime Minister that we are upset with you for replacing the finance minister. And Hafiz Sheikh Saab was sitting in that room. This is nearly 2.5 years ago now. And those statements were not made lightly. They were heavy statements. They were threatening statements. And I was amazed that the Prime Minister was actually able to listen to his MNAs talking back to him about a decision he made. And of course, the buck stops with him. Now, whether those decisions were right or wrong, but what I admire is that he listened. It's still an uphill struggle because I'll tell you why. Even my Prime Minister is surrounded by the very same 25, 40 families who control Pakistan's economy. There's another 25, 40 who pretend not to control it, but those are who we call the mafiosos, who hide behind the suited, booted ones. And their threats are live. Their children have passports of pretty much every country, including Bangladesh. I was in a fight, and I can say this openly, with the shipping companies of Pakistan. We're trying to create a legislation which would look at how much shipping companies can charge for containers and for docking foreign ships. They threatened me to my face that, madam, आप कानून बना के तो देखें, आप देखें हम आपके साथ क्या करते हैं. मैंने कहा जी हाथ आज़ाद कर लें जो करना है, हम कहाँ भाग रहे हैं आपसे, इधर ही बैठे हैं. So when the Prime Minister talks about mafias, he's not exaggerating. When he talks about the impossible blocks, I live through them every day. And one of the reasons I resigned from Commerce Ministry is because I refused. This might be, I'll say this in Urdu. बहुत हिम्मत चाहिए होती है कुरान के नीचे खड़े होकर झूठ बोलने की. नेशनल असेंबली हमारी छत पे है, तो जब मुझे कॉमर्स मिनिस्ट्री झूठ बोलने को बोलती है, आई रिफ्यूज्ड. आई एम नॉट पर्टिकुलरली रिलीजियस और मोर अपराइट इन द नेक्स्ट पर्सन, बट दोज़ख से और कब्र से हर किसी को डर लगना चाहिए. So I'll end there that the forces we're fighting against are real. These are not imagination of the Prime Minister when he says कि हमारे बहुत मुश्किल दुश्मन है. It will happen, but it's going to take at least our generation to do it. Thank you.
Shandana, thank you so much. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming today and giving us this time. Just final point, I'd like to thank FNF for being able to help us to set up this event. Frederick Naumann Foundation. So thank you to them as well, and thank you to yourselves for coming. And I would like to just harp on the last point that Ali picked up on, which is we need to increase engagement amongst ourselves. In the Economic Advisory Group has set up a Twitter handle. It's called EAG Pakistan. So I would encourage you to start following and start talking, and we can start a conversation going here. Thank you so much for your time.